Hello, I'm Will Grant, the BBC's Mexico correspondent, and you're listening to the Missing Migrants on the BBC World Service. I've been to Tucson, Arizona, to meet a team carrying out painstaking detective work to identify the bodies of undocumented border crossers, the remains of the migrants who've died in the desert.
Nobody foresaw this many dead. I never could have predicted this many people would die and continue to die on a yearly basis. We've had 2,200 deaths, which is by far more than any other jurisdiction in the country. I'm Bruce Anderson. I'm the forensic anthropologist for the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner. And in that, I'm tasked with examining the remains of many, many dead migrants and many, many other dead people that are presumed to be migrants, all crossing the desert in undocumented fashion.
I came in 2006 for graduate school in anthropology and basically started a conversation with Bruce about what was happening here. He was inundated with cases, hundreds of deaths every year. Basically what he was looking at was a mass fatality event. My first few weeks at the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner were really challenging. I came with kind of a little bit of a scared and maybe a little bit of a morbid interest about bodies. And I remember when I first went into Dr. Anderson's lab, he unzipped a body bag, and I remember backing up and kind of hitting the wall because I didn't know what I was going to see. And it was skeletal remains, and Dr. Anderson was very gentle and professional and scientific in the way that he explained to me what I was seeing, so I was more and more comfortable with it. And then actually only a week after that, I lost my father very suddenly and unexpectedly, and that changed everything. And I think my own grief from losing my dad enabled me to really pour myself into the work because I got it. I could recognize that the families were facing something that most people wouldn't understand. And I, from that point, kind of began pouring myself into the work.
Robin Reineke is a confident and studious woman with a ready smile, big glasses and bright eyes. She co-founded the Missing Migrant Project with Dr. Bruce Anderson while still a student. Today it has a simple mission: to identify the dead people found in the desert and ultimately send them home to their families.
This is our official office, which you can see is kind of small.
On the wall of Robin's office in Tucson, there is a map covered in little red dots. Each dot represents a dead body found in the vast Sonoran Desert, which stretches across the state of Arizona and along the US border with Mexico. Each dot represents a dead migrant, who, like so many, travelled from Latin America in search of a new life, but were ultimately defeated by thirst and exhaustion.
I had always wanted to do something that was giving back to those facing injustice or inequality. But I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea how big it would become. I mean, 6 years, 7 years, after beginning, I had the biggest database of missing migrants border-wide.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers of files, all color-coded.
Arranged chronologically. The earliest case, 1991. Going down through 2011.
Right.
I've had to incorporate this desk for 2012.
Any spare space used?
Exactly. 2013's down here on this little cubby. We were forced in 2000 to start collecting missing persons reports, something that medical examiners and coroner's offices usually don't do. That's the job of the police. We deal with decedents. We describe the dead, try to figure out how they died, who they are. But families were reluctant to approach U.S. law enforcement to give their report. Many of these families are living in the shadows. They're either poor and living in Mexico or in Central America, or they're living in the United States in an undocumented fashion, and they cannot go or they're afraid to go to the authorities. So they were reading more and more about all the bodies and bones found in the deserts near Tucson, so they started calling here. So we devised a form. We started taking missing persons reports of foreign nationals whose families thought they might be dead in Arizona. And Robin Reineke started as a graduate student here, and I was happy to turn that project over to her, and she has grown it into this phenomenal database That's really essential because it's one of the few places families can give accurate information about a missing person and not feel as if they're going to be grilled by law enforcement.
Tucson is actually the third highest in terms of the number of unidentified remains, following New York and LA. So when you see Tucson in a rank like that, you know, small southwestern city, you know that something extraordinary is going on. We believe very strongly that every effort should be made for all of these people to be sent home.
Wow, so it is very, very cold in here. It's a huge fridge, really, a big refrigeration unit. The first thing you notice is the smell. I don't want to call it the smell of death, but I guess that's really what it is. Around me on every single wall, on all sides, I'm surrounded by body bags containing people, really, containing human remains in various states of decomposition. And on all of the bags there are these bright orange tags with a number reflecting the year that they were found, and then so many of them just have the following name: John Doe or Jane Doe, the generic name given to unidentified remains. It's just very, very sad, really, thinking that so many of these people's attempts to find a better life ended up here.
Bodies that are decomposed, mummified, skeletonized, ravaged by animals where only a few bones are left. These people cannot be identified through normal channels. So typically forensic anthropologists take a look at the skeleton and we can construct a profile. What sex, what age approximately, how tall approximately. They may have signs of old broken bones. They may have things under their skeleton that the family might know about, the family of that missing person might know about. So we create a skeletal profile that kind of puts flesh back on that skeleton. We also try to estimate when the person died. Sometimes it's clear the person was alive yesterday, they're dead today. Sometimes with sun-bleached bone, we can just say, well, probably been out there a year, maybe as much as 5 years. We then give that information to Robin Reineke and her staff, and they go down the list of their missing persons and see if they can find a possible match.
This very scientific research undertaken by Bruce Anderson is complemented by Robin's more personal form of investigation.
So these are all 2013 cases. So these are just the items that, you know, the personal effects, things in pockets and wallets and purses, backpacks, but not the clothing.
Some of the biggest clues when trying to solve the identity of the skeletal remains found in the desert are hiding among the possessions found on the bodies. This is what they had on them.
Yes, that might be important to the family or important to the investigation. So usually like shampoo and toothpaste and deodorant are thrown out.
Things that aren't useful to help identify them. These things might help them be identified.
Exactly.
So there's a cell phone on there. Would it be possible for them to try and discover what the last number called on that was?
Certainly, if they're functional at all.
And some photos of some children, rather washed out picture.
Passport photo.
Passport photo, yeah. And that must be so frustrating for you because there you can see what is clearly this person's family.
Yeah.
And you feel like you must be almost there.
I mean, for a case like this in 2013, you know, I predict that this person will be identified within a year.
So this looks like it might have something that's a little more identifiable and unique. A wooden rosary, is that?
Looks like it, yeah. So this is an ID card.
Why can't you simply get in touch with the Mexican authorities, say, you know, where is the contact details for this person? And
well, this is a 2013 case. So first of all, this could be a case where they have indeed gotten in touch with the family and we're simply waiting for DNA results back from the lab because that takes some time. Other scenarios, sometimes they'll actually get a hold of the family for the person listed on the card and they'll say, no, he's right here, he's fine. Or they'll talk to them because it's actually a false ID that's being used.
Right, right. So even if you receive a body with a piece of Mexican identification or US identification on it, that's by far from the end of the story. It may not be that person, it may not be that ID, it may, there's still a long way to go before you can tally the body with that person.
Exactly. So we really have to treat these like a clue. It's a good clue, it's an exciting clue when an ID card is found with remains.
It's sort of quite a pathetic little sight really in its own way, isn't it? I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but it's, you know, very sad. It's very simple, humble kind of handful of possessions.
Yeah, the items, I really spend a long time looking at the items and I think about them a lot. They're powerful to me because I know how important they can be for the investigation and even moreover how important they can be to the family. I mean, they're really not very different from what we would all carry in our backpacks to go on a trip, you know. I mean, it's ultimately a hopeful journey, and I think, you know, sometimes there are certain sets of personal effects that really speak to that, like a young woman with an English-Spanish dictionary and lots of makeup and hair ties and notes on where she was going to go, and I just felt that that told a story of a lot of hope and probably even excitement to come to the U.S. I actually grew up in Seattle, Washington, and actually most of my friends in middle school and high school were immigrants, refugees for the most part from Southeast Asia. One of my closest friends was Cambodian, and her family had survived the Cambodian genocide. So hearing her stories and her experiences growing up, that was how I got interested in human remains. There's something that attending to human remains accomplishes for healing for a community that isn't accomplished in any other way, and I really sensed that from the Cambodian friends that I had. And I didn't really realize that their immigration stories and their stories of traveling and making it here and, you know, being afraid as a kid coming to school in the U.S. for the first time, that those had really impacted me as well.
Can you remember that first identification that you were involved in and that you successfully managed to identify?
Yeah, the first one that was really me, where I had connected the dots, was a man who died in the summer of 2008, I believe. So it took me a couple of years. His name was Manuel, and he had a little homemade M tattoo on his forearm. And I had talked with the wife, so we were able to photograph that, which was present on the remains, and send the photograph to her, which resulted in the positive identification.
What about that relationship with the family, though? Because it seems that it becomes, over time, very intertwined.
That was a very intense experience for me. You know, once she knew that it was him, it launched this whole other thing. So we were focused before on connecting the dots, and we were kind of checking everything scientifically. And then when you turn to the family, it's an entirely different interaction. The needs that the family has at that point are very, very different. So for her, she wanted to know, how did he die? Was he hurt? How was he found? Who found him? What day was he found? All of these really tough details that honestly at that point I wasn't prepared for her to be asking. So one of the things that we consider an important part of our work is basically the social side of identification. And what we have become now is really a family response center. It's a crisis response center for the deaths and the disappearances on the border. I've pulled a couple of cases here. So one of our earliest successes was this case, Francisco Guadalupe Romero Llanes, whose family is from Puerto Peñasco, Sonora. We got a missing persons report for him only a couple of weeks after he attempted the crossing, which was the 28th of June 2010. So this is just an example. At the time, this is my handwriting, how I would have taken the information from the person who called. We have a photo. A lot of times families will make these missing persons flyers, and they'll post them all around the border region. So he's described here as 31 years old, dark skin, light brown eyes, long curly eyelashes. The tip of his right ear is folded, dark brown wavy hair, a vertical scar on his bottom lip.
Some tattoos. And
that was ultimately the most important element, were the tattoos. So it describes a Jesus tattoo on the left arm, and then two tattoos on the right arm, Romero and Javier underneath.
It was here in the beach resort of Puerto Peñasco on the northwest coast of Mexico, Francisco Romero began his fateful journey north. Francisco was working as a security guard in one of the blocks of luxury apartments that I can see dotting the coastline, but he said he just didn't earn enough to make ends meet. So like so many of his countrymen, Francisco decided to try his luck in the United States, but he didn't tell his family that he was leaving. In her beauty salon, Emma Grittel is watched over by a large portrait of her uncle, Francisco Romero. He was a very kind of happy kind of a guy, clearly enjoyed life. There's a sort of good group of mates here, a couple of beers in their hands. Yeah, it's kind of a nice thing. She shows me photos of the man she considered her brother. So deep was their bond.
Muchas novias, sí.
That's what she was saying. Saying he was a ladies' man.
Yeah.
It was Emma who finally identified his body 2 months after he went missing.
El carácter de él es 100% bien alegre. Él era una persona muy alegre, él era muy carismático.
His character was 100% happy. He was very happy, very charismatic. He was the soul of the family.
Encontrarlo.
Honestly, although I'd asked God that we find him, a certain hope had entered my heart that we might still find him alive. Very, very deep inside me, I still thought we'd find him alive. But in an instant, my world was turned upside down. We'd found him, not as I wanted, but at the same time I felt happy, because few families find their loved ones. They asked me if it was him. I took a deep breath and said, yes, it was him. My family was waiting outside, waiting to hear what I said. And when I said it was him, to hear such crying from them, I knew I had to be strong for my parents, for my grandparents and my family, but I broke down completely. It still hurts to talk about it, and I try to avoid it. I tried to hold on to the nice memories of him. Besides being his sister, he was someone I adored. The search I did for him was very traumatic for me indeed.
Before finally identifying Francisco's body, Emma had made frequent trips to Arizona and California to see if her uncle had been detained by immigration authorities.
Jamás apareció ninguna en California, en Arizona. Él no estaba detenido. De ahí brincamos a lo que fueron hospitales.
He didn't show up in California or Arizona. He wasn't detained. From there, we started going to hospitals, going from town to town. Finally, someone at immigration said, this is going to sound cruel, but there is nowhere left to look, except the desert or the morgue. So they sent me to Maricopa County, where there is a huge morgue. It felt awful to be there, and they told me they had no information. They sent me to Pima County, and that was where I met Robin Reineke. She attended to me personally in the morgue. I went home to Puerto Peñasco and would go back to Tucson regularly to look at photos and at dead bodies that they thought shared his characteristics, but no luck.
And so how did eventually you get the information that he had died in the desert and that the chances are that the body was your uncle?
Yo recibo una llamada del condado de Pima. Me dijo, agarra tu laptop.
I received a phone call from Pima County, and I was told to get my laptop. I opened the page they sent me where they posted images of him that I could see. The first picture was part of his clothing, some boxer shorts. We identified them quickly as they were the Simpsons boxer shorts, which I knew he owned. And then I saw his first tattoo, the one of Christ. It was much smaller because his arm was wasted away and very dry. And then I saw his second tattoo, our surname, Romero. And then finally I see him, a complete image of the body. And yes, it was him. At the time, I had Robin Reineke on the phone, and she asked me if I was okay. She said I had all the time in the world to identify him, and that I take my time and breathe.
La doctora Robin. Uy, Es una persona magnífica.
Robin, wow, she's a magnificent person, a very humanitarian person. The times I was there, desperate and crying, desperate to find him, she held my hand and gave me strength. I'm still in touch with her through Facebook. We chat and say hi. I have a lot to thank her for, really a lot.
Tengo mucho que agradecerle, mucho, la verdad.
Each experience of notifying a family is different, and I'm always very nervous to pick up the phone because you never know what's going to happen. Usually, in my experience, the family is just incredibly relieved. Relieved to the point of, saying that I'm an angel that's brought peace to their family, saying that I'm their daughter and I can come and be, welcome in their home anytime. I mean, they're so grateful that it makes me feel bad sometimes. I feel bad when people thank me too much because I feel that I'm a part of the system that has done this to their family. And it breaks my heart how intensely they would be suffering so that when they're being informed of a death that they feel thankful. To me, that's a shocking position for a family to be in, and I can't imagine being thankful to the person that told me that my father died.
It strikes me that there's some very Central American and Mexican cultural elements there, very Latin American, very Mexican.
I think families are very deeply challenged by the way that these deaths happen. Any of us would be, but especially coming from Latin American cultures and Catholic belief systems, the way that these deaths happen is incredibly painful. They're alone, they're without family when they pass away, and then their bodies are not viewable. It's really a bad death. It's a bad death, especially if you have a missing person. There's no social acknowledgement that anything is wrong. You can't have a funeral. You can't have that kind of cathartic release and social acknowledgement that a loss has occurred.
In part 2 of The Missing Migrants, I meet some of the migrants preparing to cross the border into the United States, and also journey out into the desert with the American volunteers helping to ensure they survive the trip. That's all in part 2 of The Missing Migrants with me, Will Grant, coming up after the BBC World Service news.
The BBC World Service.
You don't need a radio to listen to your favourite programmes from the BBC World Service. You can listen online to me, Matthew Bannister, on Outlook as I talk to people from around the world about their incredible experiences.
And if the world of money interests you, visit the Business Daily programme page and listen to me, Manuela Zaragoza, as we examine the big issues facing the global economy.
Or pick up your smartphone and listen to me, Claudia Hammond, because if you want to live a healthier life, we report on the latest medical breakthroughs and global health issues in Health Check.
And it's not just us. There are hundreds of programmes and documentaries to choose from in our archive.
Or you can listen to BBC World Service live online.
Make your choice at bbcworldservice.com.
Coming up, part 2 of The Missing Migrants. So far we've heard about the detective work of American anthropologist Robin Reineke, who pieces together clues to identify the remains of undocumented Latin American migrants who died in the Arizona desert after illegally crossing the US border. Next, I travel to Mexico and meet a 15-year-old boy from Guatemala about to embark on this potentially deadly trip as he goes in search of a better life in the United States.
BBC News with Charles Carroll. Afghan officials say they've retaken full control of the Election Commission building in Kabul, which was attacked by Taliban insurgents a week before the presidential election. 5 gunmen, dressed as women wearing burqas, concealed automatic rifles and rocket-propelled grenades in their garments and overpowered the guards. However, after a 4-hour battle with security forces, all the attackers were killed. The US Secretary of State John Kerry has abruptly cancelled his return home from the Middle East, changing his flight plan to go to Paris to meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Sunday. They're expected to discuss an American proposal to end the crisis in Ukraine, which calls for Russia to halt its military build-up on the border. For the first time, Chinese and Australian ships investigating aerial sightings of possible debris from the missing Malaysian airliner have retrieved a number of objects from the water. None of the items recovered so far has been confirmed as related to the missing plane. A car bomb in Lebanon has hit an army checkpoint near the border with Syria. Local media say that 3 soldiers have been killed and several others wounded. It appears to have been a suicide attack. The UN Special Envoy on Education, Gordon Brown, has announced a pilot project in Pakistan with the aim of preventing girls from being forced into marriage. Mr. Brown, a former British Prime Minister, said that child marriage-free zones would be set up, in which teachers and girls would be encouraged to work together to combat forced early marriage. And the National Assembly in Cuba has approved a bill aimed at making the communist-run island more attractive to foreign investors. The law sharply reduces taxes on profits to 15% from the current 30% and makes new investors exempt from paying taxes for their first 8 years of operation. The bill is seen as a key part of President Raul Castro's reform package, which was started more than 5 years ago. And that's the latest BBC News.
Hello, I'm Will Grant, the BBC's Mexico correspondent, and welcome back to the Missing Migrants on the BBC World Service. I've been exploring how thousands of Latin American migrants have died in the vast Arizona desert after trying to cross into the United States illegally. And I've come to meet a team of volunteers working to stop even more migrants dying the same way. It's lunchtime in Arizona's Sonora Desert.
So, what's good?
It is all good. I like the tostada particularly.
Introducing me to what I'm told is the best taco stand in the state is Steve Johnston and Jim Marks.
But it's the real deal right here.
That is a good taco.
So far, so good. So far, so good.
But today their hospitality goes way beyond just feeding hungry BBC journalists.
So what do we got here, Steve?
This is what we call a migrant pack. And Jim, bless his heart, is mainly the person who puts them together. These are chips. There's some peaches. There's a tin of Vienna sausage. There's a little sort of health bar, and here's a package of juice.
Unfortunately, this is probably the American diet.
Yeah.
It's not health food, but it's actually what helps people get out of this desert, you know.
Steve and Jim are volunteers for an organisation called No More Deaths, which was set up 10 years ago when the number of migrants dying in the Arizona desert started to rise sharply.
We're going to take that bucket and we're going to take food.
Today we're heading out into the desert to drop off food and water along the trails where undocumented border crossers are known to travel as they go in search of a new life in the US. So Steve, explain to me where we're headed now.
We're going on to a wildlife refuge where we have discovered that migrants will stop for the night.
Right.
And consequently, we're going to leave food, water for them there with the hopes that they will find it when they arrive.
I mean, just in the sort of kilometre and a half or so that we've been walking, you really get a sense of just how tough this terrain is. I mean, we're surrounded by prickly trees and cactuses and it's very, very rocky underfoot. The sun is already beating down on us. It's not easy terrain in any shape or form, is it?
Not at all. And this is the easy part. By the time the migrants get to here, they've already crossed 3 mountain ranges. So this is very, very easy walking compared to what these folks have already done.
And of course, a lot of what they do through here happens at night, so the chances of a twisted ankle or worse, a broken leg, are very, very high.
Even a blister can kill you because you will lose your group and get lost. If you can't keep up, they go on without you.
Tell me about your own personal motivations in getting involved with No More Deaths.
Well, I went to college in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was involved in the civil rights movement and worked with a group that Dr. Martin Luther King was the president of. I was actually at his last speech that he gave, where he said he had been to the mountaintop and he'd seen the promised land. The next day he was murdered, and that really changed the trajectory of my life. And ever since then, my life has been committed to social justice. Seeing the need, seeing the hundreds of people who die here every year is what has brought us out.
When you meet groups of migrants, what kind of conditions have you met people in?
I have seen some of the most horrendous situations. There was a young woman named Yolanda. Her mouth was completely covered with thorns from eating the cactus. There was no water. It was 115 degrees every day in Tucson for 9 days in a row. We had to cut the shoes off of her feet because they were so swollen and so blistered. And it was just tragic. But we have seen dozens, scores, hundreds of people in as bad a shape as Yolanda was.
The U.S.-Mexico border was not a dangerous place for migrants until U.S. border policies shifted in the mid-90s.
Robin Reineke from the Missing Migrants Project.
Under the Clinton administration, there was a huge national conversation about immigration reform, similar to the recent one that we're having in the United States. And the border became this point of national concern. So the idea was to really build up Border Patrol presence and surveillance presence along the urban types of locations for clandestine border crossings, and that basically people would see that it would be so difficult to cross the border that they would be deterred, that they would turn around and not attempt a crossing. What happened was that people went around those increasingly fortified areas into wide expanses of desert and died in very high numbers.
Go ahead, sir. Hey, we got units working a group off that 165.
Successive US governments have spent billions of dollars to vastly increase border protection over the past decade. The annual budget currently exceeds that of the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Agency. This tough stance has proved popular among many US voters, especially in conservative border states like Arizona and Texas. In Arizona alone, there are over 4,000 agents patrolling the border, and I joined one of them, Agent Peter Bidigan, as he began his night shift. It wasn't long before news came in of people jumping over the border fence.
So there's two bodies that are dropping down the fence right now.
So literally there's two guys going right over the border fence as we're driving. You're hoping to apprehend them as they drop into the United States?
Yes.
Hey, 313, go ahead, sir.
So my name is Agent Peter Bidigan, and we're here in Nogales, Arizona, right on the international boundary fence.
Yeah, 10, folks.
Our role is somewhat one-dimensional in that the only thing that we do is stop people from coming through between the ports of entry. It doesn't matter if you're a U.S. citizen or you're not a U.S. citizen. You cannot enter the United States illegally between a port of entry. You have to present yourself for inspection. What we're going to do is go to a spot where it's going to put us between where this guy is.
You're going to drop down, straight down to the Fight 3.
What we're going to do is position ourselves between the fence and this individual. We use a variety of technology in the field. We have everything from ground sensors to a lot of camera technology. We use infrared at night. We also employ aerial assets such as helicopters, unmanned aerial assets like drone aircraft. The agents that work out in the field, we patrol on horseback. We also patrol on ATV and then in Border Patrol vehicles as well. 10-4, we're coming in right now.
So it is unbelievably dark now. I can't even see the fence at this stage, even though I know it's probably no further than 50 meters to my south.
Yeah, start looking around either there or a little bit further east.
Just standing at the top of this canyon where they believe this individual is going to try and make a dash for it back into Mexico. If he in any way makes himself known or pops up, what he doesn't realise is he's absolutely surrounded by border guards.
The guy starts running out of the canyon, he'll run right to us.
And his aim, of course, is just to get over that fence. Once he's over that fence, he's no concern of yours.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
408 and Brian Family negative side, negative contact.
So they apprehended him just now, right in the bottom of this canyon.
Within an hour of the initial call alerting agents to the illegal border crossers, another unit radios in to say the men they were looking for had been arrested. However, they were not regular migrants. These men were drug traffickers, carrying with them large amounts of marijuana.
So this, blimey, it is another heavy, big bale of marijuana fashioned into some kind of backpack. They reckon that's around 25 kilos worth of marijuana. This is what was found on one of the men who was apprehended. His friend was carrying another. And here he is. He's a 19-year-old Latin American. He's just being taken now and loaded into the van. He's going to be taken to a detention centre. Unsuccessful mission as far as he's concerned, and very successful as far as the border agents are concerned.
All right, sounds good, sir. Thanks, appreciate it.
The high point here in the Tucson sector was the year 2000, and we arrested just over 600,000 individuals that crossed illegally. In 2013, we arrested just over 120,000 individuals.
That's a massive drop. What's going on? What accounts for those change in numbers?
There's a lot of factors that contribute to that. We have a lot more technology in the field. We have more agents in the field. A lot of what we see, too, is due to economic factors. There's an economic ebb and flow. When the economics here are good, we see more people come.
A lot of the migrant rights groups on both sides of the border suggest that this very infrastructure that we can see, this sort of strengthening of the border controls that's pushed migrants to more dangerous areas in the desert and therefore caused the deaths.
There are, unfortunately, for the people that are crossing illegally, they're in the hands of criminal organizations that have no regard for human life. And they will do anything they can to essentially extort these people and get as much money as they can off these people. Unfortunately for the migrant, it can mean being taken through an extremely dangerous part of the desert.
It's certainly true that today the smuggling of people as well as drugs is controlled by Mexico's drug cartels. Very few people will get to make the crossing without their say-so, and certainly not without paying a cartel-affiliated coyote or guide to take them across the border. Just south of the border, you'll find the staging post for the final leg of this journey for the migrants.
So we've made it to the small town of Altar, about an hour and a half's drive from the border with the United States. And it's a surreal kind of a place. I've never really been anywhere in Mexico where the entire town seems to be built around the idea of illegal immigration. In this sleepy main square I'm in, it's surrounded by a series of small shops, and they all seem to sell the same items. Camouflaged rucksacks and camouflaged trousers so that people can hide from the migration authorities in the Arizona desert. Hats, obviously, to protect people from the sun. Water bottles, more migrants die of dehydration than anything else. And then there are these strange carpet shoes that people wear in order to make sure they leave no footprints in the sand.
I've been through hunger and cold right through your bones. The heat when you're walking turns your drinking water warm and brown. It's like coffee. It doesn't bring any relief. When walking across the sand, you wear these special shoes, but it seems like they make no difference in protecting your feet from the heat of the earth. The skin comes off your feet as though they weren't there. I've seen snakes and tarantulas, but I don't care. I'm going to go anyway.
38-year-old Michaela is just one of the migrants I met in Altar waiting to cross the desert. She's currently nursing a broken leg after falling badly during a previous attempt. Michaela reveals she has already spent quite a bit of time living as an undocumented worker in the United States.
I lived there happily for 10 years and had 2 children there. When I arrived, I worked as a rubbish collector in a place where they have live concerts. We would pick up the rubbish after the concert with our hands. I did that for a month and a half, but they said the work was ending because the winter was coming. So I started making hamburgers. I did that for 6 years. Sometimes I washed plates, or I would do office cleaning too.
And so then how did you end up coming back to Mexico?
I came back because my mother died, so I came back and said I'll be back soon. But then it turned out I couldn't get back.
So you left in 2010, and since then you haven't been able to get back to the United States. Why has it been so difficult?
Because there is a lot of vigilance on the border. Now when you cross, they see you, they're watching. Sometimes you walk for many days, but they still get you. So these days it can't be done.
What do you intend to do then? Are you going to try again?
Yes, I'll try again. Yes, I've already tried 8 times.
8? 8 times?
Yes, yes. They pick me up and send me back. I was detained last time. The judge gave me 30 days. He said to me, "Why can't you understand that you're not able to cross?" And he gave me 30 days in jail. I cried for a week inside, but I said, I'm going to try again. I'm going to try again.
So for you, the idea of reaching the United States is crucial. You see no other possible future except north of the border.
Yes, my children here go to school, but they are not learning well. Here, I can't afford to send them to private school because my money doesn't stretch that far. And the public schools, no. They go to school, but they don't read well. They need university studies. If not, there's nothing.
On the side streets down the main square of Altar, there's a whole series of minivans there. There's one just coming down the road now, actually. These are the buses, essentially, that take people to the border. It's like a shuttle service that you'd get, almost like you'd get to take you to the airport. Let's see in one of them if we can get in and take a look. Step in the door. Buenas. Hola. I'm just going to get in. So they've stripped out all the seats, and all that's left are these long metal benches. Very uncomfortable to sit on, but very efficient use of space. There's 3. Now that means you can get probably, I would say, somewhere in the region of 40 people can fit in this van, which, if it had seats in it, would be designed for a maximum of about 10. Let's have a little chat with this very young-looking migrant, see what his story is. Buenas. ¿Cómo estás? Travelling alone is 15-year-old Francisco from Guatemala. While other children his age are still in school, he says his family back home are depending on him to make it to the United States. So he's saying, well, he may just be 15 years old, but his father has had an accident, therefore can't work, is injured, and he has to do something, so he's got pretty much no alternative. In the worst case scenario, you could lose your life. Is it worth the risk, worth the cost? So saying, yeah, it's absolutely worth it, because when you live like they do in extreme poverty, this is a fight for life and death anyway, so he may as well take this journey, he may as well try, because really it's the only option they've got. He keeps using the words extrema pobreza, extreme poverty. And I've seen that part of Guatemala where he's from, and it is extremely, extremely poor. It's very rural. It's a very, very tough life. What have you got in your backpack? What do you carry with you? Some water, some drinking water, some fruit, some food. Algunas latas? Yeah. Some tins of food. Y ropa. Algo de ropa? Sí. And some clothes. It's tragic, really. I mean, based on these meagre little things, a blanket that will barely keep you warm in a heated house, let alone in a desert. There's no way near enough calories to see him through the next 4 days, and no way near enough water. How much did you
paid? He's already paid around about $4,500 to get to this point. So he reckons he's still got a few payments to make. He reckons there's at least another $1,000 or so to go, which for a man from rural part of Guatemala is an extraordinary amount of money. Gracias, Mucha suerte.
Francisco's dream is one shared by young men and women from towns and villages all over Latin America. A sense of adventure, a duty to their family, and sometimes sheer desperation drives thousands across the US border every year, many of them blind to the risks they face crossing the desert.
If I could talk to those young men, I'd tell them, look at me, your mother could end up like me. I'd tell them not to cross, at least not like that, illegally, to such an ugly and dangerous place.
In the dusty industrial town of Ciudad Obregón in northern Mexico lives Carolina Chan. The full-time mother with a passion for songwriting and poetry runs a busy home full of excited children and grandchildren. But these days there's a notable absence. Her 19-year-old son Marco Antonio, who set off for the United States back in 2012.
Pues quizá era un sueño, ¿verdad? It was just a dream. Maybe he'd have been able to do something there. We don't know. I'm going to live in the US. One day I'll have a nice car. He used to say those things when he was young, but we all took it as a kid's game. Even in the final days before he left, when he'd say he was going to go to the north, I thought he was joking. I never thought he'd try to live here.
Not long after her son set off, Carolina received a message from one of the other migrants Marco Antonio had crossed the border with. Unable to keep up with the pace of the group, he had been left behind in the desert. Immediately she knew her son's fate.
When I heard he'd been in the desert for 6 days, I said to myself, my son is dead. I was sure of it. My son is dead. I came home and went straight to the computer to see what I could find. I searched the internet for anything I could think of. I made call after call after call. Loads of them. I couldn't tell you how many.
Carolina's tenacity eventually put her in touch with Robin Reineke at the Missing Migrant Project in Tucson.
We've been in touch quite a bit over the last year. It was a pretty exhaustive process to finally arrive at the identification. But what turned out to be most important for establishing a link was actually a detail about his clothing. So shortly before Marco crossed, he had visited his father, and his father had loaned him a pair of camouflage pants for the journey. And his father is a little bit bigger, and so he removed a button and basically adjusted the pants so that they could be a little bit tighter for Marco. So what it appears to be here is that one button has been moved.
Moved from the normal place down to a little lower, so it'd be a bit tighter. And that was the really key identifying feature for the mother.
That was what convinced her.
Al ver su pantalón. On seeing his trousers, I knew it was him. They say mothers are never wrong. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong when I saw him. People here said to me, no, it just looks like it might be him. There are many he crossed wearing those kind of clothes. No, I said to them, that's my son. When my husband saw the trousers along with the other photos, he said, that's it, they are Marco's trousers. Robin was the intermediary between the Mexican consulate and us. She urged them to do a DNA test on the body. If she hadn't, perhaps we still wouldn't have him home. It's very important what she does. In fact, I've told Robin if there is anything I can do for other mothers of young people, then I'm here for them, whatever I can do.
Voy a pedirle a Dios que me dé 5 minutos. Me deje estar ahí donde tú estás ahora.
you've written a song for Marco Antonio. Can you explain to us a little bit about the lyrics that are in there and what your feelings were when you wrote it?
Pues la canción se llama Voy a pedirle a Dios 5 minutos.
The song is called I'm Going to Ask God for 5 minutes. 5 minutes to be with Him.
Quizás para despedirme.
Nothing more. Perhaps to say goodbye.
Today, the Missing Migrant Project is expanding, albeit slowly. Robin Reineke has added another full-time member to the team, and they are joined by a number of eager volunteers. Around 2/3 of the bodies found in the Arizona desert are eventually identified, but it's the unsolved cases which still weigh on Robin's mind.
This wall contains records for unidentified individuals, and you can see that Pima County actually has records for nearly 900 unidentified individuals that have been examined at this facility. 900 is a huge number.
Are there any cases which really have stayed in your mind that keep you up at night?
Yeah, a lot. For some reason, I'm just attached to the person based on their photograph. There's this one man, Marlon, who's been missing for a long time, and I like him, his photograph. He's always smiling, and he's a little bit chubby, and he's holding a soccer ball in a couple pictures and a fishing rod in another, and I just think about him randomly.
And how do you keep from taking that home with you at the end of the day?
I definitely do to some extent. I care a lot about the work that I do, and I think about it a lot. Mainly I'm obsessed with the bigger picture and trying to get as many people sent home as possible.
Do you admire the migrants?
I definitely admire the migrants. Yeah, I mean, I admire that they, for the most part, are undertaking something scary for their families. I think the way that a lot of the migrants hold their families as central to who they are and to what they need to do with their lives is something that I personally can learn a lot from. The migrants are so connected to their families and really structuring their lives around what they perceive their families' needs to be. The people coming through the border, the people walking for days in the desert, the people that we're finding that are coming to this office are workers. They want to come here for a job. Should it really be that hard? We've created this gauntlet that's really the service entrance to America through the desert. I don't think any of us want the people that are trying to be Americans and really representing the American dream to have to go through that.
I'm Will Grant, and you've been listening to The Missing Migrants. The producer was Richard Fenton Smith.
Freedom